Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. This episode of the World Wanderers podcast is sponsored by AutoSlash. AutoSlash is the #1 site for getting a great deal on a car rental. They figure out the best coupons and discount codes to get you the lowest rate possible, and then track prices on your rental right until the day you pick up the car. If they find a lower rate, they email you so you can lock in the savings. It's like price protection on your rental. They can even track the price of rentals made on their websites. AutoSlash has saved customers millions of dollars in car rentals, and we're some of those customers. When we rented a car to get from Atlanta to Charleston this past summer, we paid hundreds of dollars plus so much extra money in fees. On our recent trip from Cancun to Tulum in Mexico, we rented a car and it cost us only $7. And we actually thought that something must be wrong because when on earth is a car rental only $7? Of course, we still had to fill up the car with gas and we did have to pay Mexican insurance, which is a specific situation to Mexico. But we were super impressed with the fact that all we had to do is go to autoslash.com. It was completely free to sign up and get a quote. We were able to choose what type of car we wanted, how many doors we wanted it to have, if we wanted it to be manual or automatic, and all of that other good stuff. So head on over to autoslash.com and try it for yourself. It doesn't only work in Mexico. You can use AutoSlash all across North America, as well as other places like Europe. If you're planning your summer getaway and you think that a car might make it a little bit more convenient, check out autoslash.com. All right, now on to today's episode of the podcast. We are very excited to be joined by Andy Steeves. Andy has been traveling practically since birth. First, it was touring Europe with his renowned father, Rick Steeves, who a lot of you have probably heard of. And now he currently splits his time between Prague, Medellin, and his home city of Seattle. He runs an award-winning company called Weekend Student Adventures, which we dive into on this episode of the podcast. He is also the author of Andy Steeves' Europe, City Hopping on a Budget, as well as the host of the Andy Steeves Travel Podcast. Andy has lived such a cool life. He's created such an amazing career for himself, similar to his father, Rick Steeves. And on this episode, we talk about what it was like growing up traveling, why he's continued to travel, why he chose to be in the travel industry, and what life's like as a author, as a business owner, and as somebody who gets to work from anywhere in the world. So without further ado, here's Andy. We are very excited to be joined on the podcast today by Andy Steeves, who is an author, he's a podcast host, and he's also the founder of Weekend Student Adventures. Welcome to the show today, Andy.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're super excited for this conversation. You have been traveling since you were a small child, and I'm curious, what's your first travel memory? Like, when do you first remember being like, okay, I'm somewhere different that's not the U.S.?
That's funny you should ask. Let's see. I think the first time one of my first memories was roughhousing with my dad on a bed on an overnight cruise from Copenhagen up to Oslo, I believe. We were on this kind of not quite cruise ship, but fast ferry, and we were just horsing around on a bed. And he swiped my legs out from under me. It knocked the air out of me, and as a little kid, I thought I was dying. So this is the first time. This was my first memory ever, just because that really stuck with me. But don't worry, he wasn't abusive growing up.
And how old were you at that point?
I think I was like 5 or 6 years old at the time. But that's what it's funny, the random little things that stick out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think that memories that stick out when you're younger are really interesting to kind of look at, because I think that you can kind of glean a lot from them. You can kind of understand the way you think and the way you are as an adult from those types of things, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
And so from there, how often did you travel as a child?
My mom would bring myself and my sister over to visit my dad halfway through his long trips through Europe. So he'd go over for about 3 months each year over the summer, and that's a long time to be away from the family. So the three of us would go kind of track him down, whether he was in Germany or Italy or Ireland. We'd go once a year for those long family trips, and then we'd try to take a bit of a vacation. I don't know, sometimes to Mexico, once or twice to Hawaii in the off season, but. Yeah, it was 2 to 4 weeks in Europe every year growing up.
Was that something? So I know when you're a kid and your parents do stuff and you're kind of along for the ride, sometimes it can just be like, oh, whatever, this is boring. Like, I don't care. I'd rather be playing video games. Did it feel kind of like that, or was it right from the start where you were like, oh, this is amazing, we're in this like foreign country? How did you feel about it at the time?
No, it was very much the former. My dad is the hardest worker I've ever met in my life. He just pounds through a city and researching and updating his guidebooks and researching hotels and restaurants and doing walking tours with various local guides, all these different things he does during the day. And then he'll stay up as long as he needs to be sure and get all of his notes down before he goes to sleep. That's kind of a rule he holds himself to. So when you're his family tagging along, he doesn't slow down at all. So you're expected to keep up. And yeah, he's a pretty intense traveler. It was always work when we were going through Europe, not so much fun family time. So it was a situation where it wasn't the most fun experience all the time, but it did really open my eyes to the beautiful diversity of Europe, and it really gave me the background and training and skills I needed to do what I do now: a podcast, tour company, and guidebook.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on something interesting there, where I think there's kind of, and especially now, I mean, probably not so much when you were little because social media wasn't around, but it's like this idea that, as a travel writer or a travel blogger or a travel podcaster, anyone who works in the travel industry, it's like, oh, cool, you get to travel for a living. But I feel like, what you're talking about is the fact that you got to go to these cool places, but, your dad's hustling, like he's going to all these places to get this content and then actually putting the content together and producing it. And that's, that can be a lot and kind of take away from this, like, okay, we're just like adventuring around and seeing things as we see them and that sort of thing.
Exactly, because he has an agenda. He has an agenda that he has to get through every day. And, there were times when my sister and we weren't really getting along with each other. And then my parents got tired of us and sent us away with 10 euros for the two of us for dinner. And they're like, just go find your own dinner. And this is when we're like 12 and 10 years old, which was barely enough for a burger and fries. But that taught us how to, get along and find new situations, and we swam instead of sinking. So, all in all, I got to say it was an incredible childhood growing up, and I'm fortunate to have all these experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Was going out and doing solo travel on your own once you were older, was that something you had in mind, like throughout your teenage years, or were you kind of thinking like, I'm just going to settle down and live maybe a more conventional life than the one you experienced growing up?
My dad's fondest travel memories, I believe, are from his first solo travel through Europe. I don't mean to always bring it back to him, but he enjoyed himself so much. That's what connected him with a co-author of his, which really changed his life and set him off on course to run Rick Steves Europe. With him having that experience, he, I think, wanted to be sure and help facilitate my own backpacking through Europe when I was old enough. And after I graduated from high school, my best friend Alex and we went on a 6-week backpacking tour through Europe, and that was great. It was an incredible experience to do exactly what we wanted when we wanted. And in fact, I ended up seeing more museums in several cities than I had ever before, even with my dad. So, I was the one doing the research, organizing all the travel plans. And so I learned a lot. And I don't know about you guys, but every once in a while, especially on a big, long international trip, especially when you're tired, when you're jet lagged, when you're hungry, you kind of get that pit in your stomach and you're like, what the hell did I get myself into on these longer excursions? And that was my first introduction to that feeling. But I was fortunate enough to have a friend. We got along. Everything went well in the trip. And now I still get that feeling, but I know that it's just a passing sort of momentary depression. But then once the clouds lift, then you can really set off on your adventure. Do you guys ever get that feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been in the last year, especially, we've been a lot more stable. Like, we have an apartment in Mexico City. We just do like more weekend trips. But I think that kind of stemmed from having that feeling of like, oh, I'm so exhausted. Like, I can't do it today. But I remember when we were doing big backpacking trips before we were working and traveling, like sometimes we just like need a day to watch Netflix in bed. And that's okay to take that. Like, that's just kind of, I think, part of the human experience a little bit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You got to remember to recharge, and remember you can't sightsee or do anything if your body's not up for it.
Yeah, and I think too, it's also like if you don't really feel like it and you're exhausted, and then you go out and see something that's pretty incredible, I think it's really hard to appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so, you had this backpacking experience, and at that point, like, would, 18, 19-year-old you, however old you were at that point, would he be surprised about where you are now, like running a successful tour company and that sort of thing? Like, was that on your sort of radar or your path?
That's an interesting way to phrase the question. I was really planning on studying architecture at Notre Dame, and I ended up in industrial design. So I was given myself a chance to try completely different industries and completely different practices. But then I spent my summers working as a tour guide for my dad's company, and then I studied abroad. And those were other types of travel as well, working on the road and providing a service to paying customers, and two, studying abroad, where I got to stay in Rome for 4 months, and I had the time of my life. But that's when I really realized that there was a need for budget travel for students abroad. And I had the chance to develop a business plan at my last 2 years at Notre Dame. And just in 2010, I was like, I don't really have anything to lose right now. Now's my chance. Let's give this a shot and see if there is something to this weekend tour company for students abroad in Europe. And now it's been 8 years. So I started with 5 cities. Now we run, I think, 15 or 16 different itineraries, weekend trips as long as week-long spring, summer, and fall break tours. And man, it's just been an incredible chance for me to connect with and interact with amazing locals from across Europe and around the world. But yeah, this kept me busy for the last few years.
Yeah, and it's focused on students who are studying abroad in Europe who are there for longer periods of time, but on the weekends or when they have like a week off to go take trips. That's kind of like the target market, I guess.
That's right. And if I could rebrand or rename the company, I totally would. Weekend Student Adventures kind of puts us into a corner, in terms of what people think we offer. But we do more than student tours, and we do more than weekend tours now. You're very right that that's the original niche that we were going after. But I've realized that my approach to travel, through connecting with locals, efficient sightseeing, all the must see and must do things are included in our packages. This sort of approach to organized tours, I think, is relevant to everyone, not just students. So I've branched out and started andysteves.com, where we're laying the foundations for tours where we stay in hotels but still interact with the same great locals and have the same great experiences.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. What was the very first group you took on a tour like?
Yeah, we had, I think, 8 or 9 people in London, and it was just a collection of students mostly coming from the school I spoke at John Cabot in Rome. They came out to London for a weekend. I was running it solo, and I had spent 10 days prior learning everything that I was going to teach for the weekend. And I still stay in touch with some of the people on that tour. So I have a bunch. I've been fortunate to make a lot of friends with tour members over the years. It was a professional tour, but I was very close to the students' age. I was only like 23, and these students were 20 and 21. But I had been through the city a few times before. I had taken a bunch of tours. I'd learned a lot. So I was really just kind of designing the tours as I went. But having a chance to go through it in person really helped me refine the itineraries for each of these different cities. So I did a tour in London, and then Paris, and then 2 in Prague, and 1 in Rome. It was just these itineraries actually provide the skeleton, the backbone of my new guidebook, Andy Steve's Europe: City Hopping on a Budget. I've taken thousands of people through these itineraries, and then I just copied those over into the book for each of the 13 cities that I feature.
Yeah, what does it look like when you're, I mean, maybe a good way to think about it would be like, so when you're thinking about doing a new city and adding a new city and a new tour, what does the process look like of like getting, like, I guess, honing down to the final tour that you're actually going to use and take customers on?
Sure. It takes about 2 months of research. I'm collecting ideas, reading newspaper articles, reaching out to local guides, setting up a kind of 10-day visit to any new city. Then I arrive, and I usually stay in 2 different apartments or Airbnbs in 2 different neighborhoods that I want to experience more than others. And then I spend the next week and a half just doing everything I possibly can in the city during the day and night, marking all those experiences and venues on a map, and then seeing which has the most bang for your buck, and then linking all those together in a geographical, in an order that makes geographical sense. That's been a formula I've applied to like 15 or 16 different cities, and it's worked out really well. The reviews we get, people just love our approach to these weekends and spring break trips. So it's been really rewarding to do something I'm passionate about, but also something that I happen to be pretty good at.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love how my brain's very logical. So I love that you do all that in such an organized way, and the fact that you look at like, where are things geographically located? Because I think that's so key when you're planning days. Like it sucks spending a couple hours in a big city just transporting from one place to another. And if you can do, one thing that's in an area and then do the other thing that's in that area too, that's definitely makes it a lot more enjoyable, I think, as the person experiencing it.
And your time is just so valuable on a short 3-day visit that it makes no sense to go cross town more than once on a tour. So we do our best way to kind of take people on a long loop through town, and then end up right back at the hostel when it's end of the day, time for a siesta.
Yeah, definitely. And so do you lead most of the tours yourself?
No, I hardly lead any of them anymore, because that formula continues where I lead the first several tours in a new city, and then throughout that time, of course, I reach out to local guides, and I'm feeling them out for who would be a good fit to be a local guide for the company WSA.
That's awesome. I was curious. So obviously you do lead some of the ones at the beginning, and you probably led a lot right off the get-go. I'm curious what it's actually like to lead a tour, like to be in charge of a group of people and make sure they're having fun and having a good experience and navigating things like food poisoning, jet lag, all that crazy stuff.
There's like a few hangovers as well with that
Yeah.
group of people.
Yeah, hangovers.
The job description of a good tour guide is very long, because you got to be everything to everybody. You have to be scholarly. You have to know your shit, of course. You got to know what you're talking about. But you also need to be personable and be able to talk and just shoot the breeze about the weather with any number of different kinds of people. You got to be fun, but you also got to be serious, so people take you, listen to what you're saying, because it should be important. It's a lot of responsibility, but it's a lot of fun. So it's a little bit of everything, and you got to be in the moment, but always planning for the next moment. You got to, so all of those different factors really create or make a need for you got to be on all the time. And tour guiding isn't for everybody, especially multi-day tours, because you're right, you're working with all sorts of different personality types. You could do the best tour, but people could find it so boring just because you're not tailoring it to what they're familiar with. It's so important to take why is Baroque sculpture, like Bernini's sculptures and architecture, why is that so important? What about the Paris or London tube metro system? Like, what about that is so important? Why is it a big deal? To know why these things are the way they are over in Europe really kind of opens your eyes to a new kind of travel, and it's up to the tour guide to bring that to life.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really interesting point there with this, especially with kind of like a younger demographic. I think that and I can relate to this myself. I think Ryan probably can too, is like when you look at something, you're like, okay, you know, it's cool. Like I've seen it in guidebooks. It's been in my history textbooks, maybe in school. Like it's cool, but like I don't really understand what I'm looking at. And I think that when people have that context, you can connect to that thing a lot more. And then in turn, you connect with the culture and the country and that place. And I think that that's just one of those little things that can make your experience of a city or of a place just a little bit better.
That's why it's important to invest in a local guide, whether it's spend a couple hours on a free walking tour that goes off daily at 10 a.m. from the main squares in almost every city in Europe, or you can hire a private guide. But my favorite example that I give is looking at the Sagrada Familia, and that's the famous ongoing construction project. It's a cathedral being built in Barcelona, designed by Antoni Gaudí. And for years, I would just walk past it and think like, that's just an ugly building. What's the big deal? It looks like an ugly sandcastle. And then I started studying it, and I realized Antoni Gaudí had a technique of building a wireframe out of strings and then attaching lead weights to them to hang downwards in the shape of a U or a parabola. And he would study that shape in a mirror and then sketch it right side up, and that's what provided the kind of the framework for this massive cathedral and a lot of his other famous buildings. What you get is much more organic arches, and it gives the effect that somebody's pulling up on the church out of the ground, and that gravity has been reversed, which is such a contrast to all the other churches in Europe. If you can think of St. Paul's in London or St. Peter's in Rome or Notre Dame in Paris, those are all such Gothic or Renaissance or Baroque churches, but so it's just really interesting to contrast that. And then when you go inside, it's nearly a spiritual experience. With the ceiling looks like it's all colored from colored glass, painted glass, rather than stained glass. It's much brighter, and the ceiling looks like a rainforest canopy, and it's so beautiful and peaceful when you step into that building. And the cool thing is it's an ongoing construction project. So, they're hoping to finish it in the next 20 years. So if we're lucky, we can still stick around and see the finished. If I get to see that finished, I'll die happy whenever it is done.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you use that as the anecdote, because our first trip to Europe, we were 21. We just graduated college, and we were just backpacking around Europe. And I think it was us and a friend. I think we were all pretty hungover after like a late night of drinking, and we went to La Sagrada Familia, and there was a gigantic line. And I think our reactions were all kind of similar, like, oh, yeah, that looks cool. But then there was a gigantic line, and we're like, you know what, let's just go get like a menu del dia and go somewhere else. But now, years later, as you like learn more about it, and you're like, oh, wow, we probably should have like hung around and checked that thing out a little bit more.
Yeah. And that's why, people kind of poo-poo, oh, I don't need a tour guide. But yes, you kind of do. It's so, like, if you're not learning about what you're looking at, what's the point of traveling in the first place? So I'm always a huge proponent of learning the backstory. And so that puts some responsibility on the traveler. You got to do a little bit of research ahead of time to really appreciate what you're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. Something I'm curious about, I think a lot of people who travel a lot, who have done really long-term backpacking trips, can probably relate to this feeling of maybe jaded's not the right word, but if you're traveling through Europe, people talk about how like, oh, I'm seeing the same stuff, like I'm seeing cathedrals, I'm seeing town squares, and it kind of loses a little bit of its luster. How is someone who spends a lot of time there, who's designing tours, you're designing tours for people who maybe don't have that experience. How do you kind of like keep your mindset in the perspective like, okay, what's someone who's new to Europe going to think about this?
Yeah, there's an expression for that. ABC, another bloody church. I have toured around with Brits and Irish, and they use that expression all the time. It's true. You can kind of get sightseeing numbed or sightseeing overload, and you just got to take it at a pace that works for you. For me, it's my job, so I go in and I learn, and I always appreciate the virtues of the Renaissance, what a difference in all of our lives that made, and what it and how that led to the Baroque movement. I'm a big fan of Art Nouveau, so I geek out on all these historical subjects pretty hard. But for the traveler going to Europe, there's times when you're also going to be overwhelmed, even if it is your first time. And again, you just gotta be true to yourself and listen to what your body's telling you, and rest up if you need to. Take a night at the movies, or just take a night in, because when you're touring, it's really easy to just go out every night, because every night there's a new bar that you want to check out. But you just got to remember to listen to what your body's telling you and take it easy.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And I relate to that a lot from our first trip in Europe. Just like, it's nice to switch things up too. Like if you're doing a lot of cities where you're seeing those squares and those churches constantly, and you catch yourself in that mindset of like, oh, it's another church, which like absolutely been there, done that. I think if you switch it up and go to like southern France or the south of Portugal and go to the beach for a week, it's like you don't need to look at churches. You can just relax like in the sun and then feel recharged to go back to a city and do a bunch of sightseeing and historical stuff and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So one thing I'm curious about is, you traveled a certain way with your dad when you were young, and, obviously you are an adult now finding your own way to travel. I'm curious how your travels have shifted, and also how you've seen maybe like the industry in general shift with how, young people are traveling now.
Yeah, 2 or I guess 3 words: technology and sharing economy. The fact that we all are traveling around with smartphones and always connected has really changed the way people travel, for better and worse. Some people have a hard time putting their phones away and really interacting with the people that they're surrounded by in Prague or in Budapest or in Paris. And then number 2 is the sharing economy. I love Uber because I don't have to worry about taxis ripping me off. I take Uber in Colombia, where I live in Medellin. I take Uber in Budapest, a city that's notorious for crooked cabbies, and that way I don't need to worry about getting ripped off. So I really like the apps that are out there so that you can facilitate these shared economies. Also Airbnb. Of course, I've loved staying with Airbnb for years. We have to be sensitive to the fact that it's pushing out a lot of locals who've lived in the historic center their entire lives, but their landlords have figured out that they can rent their apartments and make 3 times as much money on Airbnb as opposed to a local long-term tenant. So the technology and sharing economy has really opened up the continent and made travel a lot easier these days.
Yeah, absolutely. You brought up, some of our favorite services. And I think that, when we started backpacking in 2011, like even, 7 years, it's changed so much. Like I think I had a BlackBerry at that point. So I obviously wasn't going to bring it like overseas with me. So I think I had an iPad and that was all. And like there was no data or anything on it. And I remember talking to our friends, like probably about a year ago, they were asking us some questions about Europe, and they're like, I think cell phone plans and that sort of thing. And we were like, well, we didn't have cell phones like when we were in Europe in 2011. And they're like, wait, like, how did you get from point A to point B? And I was like,
what did you do with yourself?
Yeah, like actually. And I was like, a map? They're like, wait, you know how to read a map? And I was like, I'm not that much older than you. Like, I think we're only like 2 years older than them. And I was like, this is such an absurd conversation.
It's so funny, but it's true. I used to use just a flip phone with a few minutes while I was over there, and using like an iPod or an iTouch, I think, just on Wi-Fi to do some emails every once in a while. But yeah, things have really changed.
So you mentioned spending part of your time in Medellin, Colombia. How do you where do you set up your home, I guess, with so much travel?
For years, it's been Prague. Prague has been my home base. I ran a kind of an Airbnb operation on the side with a friend of mine. Things have changed in Prague. They're being more strict on the legality of Airbnb because it's really changing the city. There's a lot more competition and prices are getting driven down for hosts. So I checked out of that. I've kind of wrapped up that side thing. And let's see, it's hard to say where I'm living or based now. I'm from Seattle. Tonight I'm going to be sleeping at mom's house when I return home to the Seattle area. But I've spent 3 to 4 months a year for the last kind of year and a half, I guess, in Colombia. So I've spent 4 or 5 months in Medellin, and I absolutely love it. It's just a beautiful city, warm people, great culture. I'm practicing my Spanish and learning a little bit of salsa as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's somewhere we went on a big backpacking trip in 2014, and every time we got to a place in South America where we felt a bit uncomfortable, or maybe it wasn't like the nicest location, or things like food poisoning, we're like, oh, we never should have left Medellin. It was kind of like our tagline for our whole South America trip.
That's the thing. I went a year and a half ago. And close to 2 years almost. And I was just like, Medellin. And then I walked through the neighborhood Laureles, and I was like, this is the coolest neighborhood I've ever been in my life, all considering all cities. And that's, for me, I felt that was quite a reaction. I was like, this is interesting. I really like this neighborhood. And so, I was fortunate. I just kind of for fun last year spent an afternoon with a real estate agent, and we visited like 6 different properties. And the last one was in Laureles. It was a double floor penthouse. And the price was right, and I bought it.
That's amazing.
So I made an investment because the dollar versus the peso is really strong. The cost of living is, it's so nice there. If you stay out of Poblado, the touristy area, you can have lunch for $2, or breakfast delivered for $2, about $3.50 for lunch, and then a date with drinks for dinner, maybe $20-$25. And coming from Seattle, or you guys can relate in Vancouver, it's just so expensive, to live in these major cities. So it's I like to live on the peso, but try to make money in the dollar. That's been a formula that works for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right now. We've been living in Mexico City for the past 6 months, so very similar, where we're still really close to home, able to work our jobs, and the things, projects we're working on are all in Canada and the U.S., but able to go out for a really nice dinner here. It costs $20. Go to a movie, you can go to like the super nice movie. It's like $10.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of one of these. Yeah, it's one of these interesting things, because I think that people like yourself, other people who live kind of a more nomadic life, people who have traveled kind of understand it. But I think when we're talking to like our parents or family members, or even some friends who have lived very stable lives and just vacation for like a week or 2 a year, they're very much like, why would you live in Mexico City? And I'm like, do you understand what my expenses look like and how good I can live here?
Yeah. People ask me the same about Medellin. Of course, there's another context, but you guys will have to come down and visit sometime when you get a moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's been basically on our list of somewhere that we want to return to for probably a decent chunk of time, basically since we left there in 2014.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, you're always welcome. Let me know.
So with Weekend Student Adventures, you guys are solely focused on Europe right now. Are you thinking of expanding that to other parts of the world, like Colombia or South America?
There's a number of things I'm considering. We have an innovative product called a Detour, a WSA Detour. And what I did was, so many people were coming up to me and say, hey, can you just tell me what to do for free? And then I'll go off and do it on my own. Do you mind if I just kind of do my own travel? And I'm like, this is my business. This is how I'm supposed to make money. I can't just give away my secrets for free. So I was like, what is the problem with our tours? Why, there's a lot of people who love our tours, but a lot of people didn't feel like it was a right fit. So I decided to write up a kind of 10-page chapter for each city, and we include your sightseeing reservations and your accommodation reservations, and then put that confirmation information into the first page of the detour, and so that you can scan the barcode on this first page at the door of the Colosseum and the Vatican and skip the line and get in. And then you're staying in a hostel that we work with and that we trust and that we've had good experience at. So that's been a formula that we've called a detour, and people just kind of connect the dots at their own pace. So that way it can run any day of the year, and it's perfect, ideal for somebody who just wants to do their own thing. Because there's a lot of students are hesitant, and I don't blame them, about paying good money to spend an entire weekend with a company. People really value their weekends and their money, of course. And I know that's a big hurdle. So the detour was something that kind of fit in there. That's something that I could take outside of Europe. But in terms of our tours, there's just, there's so much going on in Europe. And I feel like if I tried to expand, I wouldn't be able to offer the quality that I'm committed to with WSA.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. And I love that idea of the detour, especially, for things that I look for. I think especially as somebody who's in their late 20s now, as opposed to their early 20s, I think it's just like, I really appreciate like my space and my time alone and kind of being able to work on my own schedule as opposed to being like, okay, we're going here, here, here. But I love that you can plan out all those logistics, because I think especially when you're busy, whether or not you work full time or you're a student, it's really hard to plan those trips, and it can get kind of like to crunch time where you're like, oh God, I'm not going to see anything in this place because I've spent no time booking or reserving or any of that stuff.
Yeah. Yep. And so the detours, what they do is they kind of take away the headache of travel, like the basic headaches of travel, where to stay and what are you going to see. And then you can focus on like the farmers markets or the nightlife or cafes, whatever it is that you're into.
Yeah, definitely. So you said you spend some time. Are you still spending time in Prague?
I was just there, but nowhere near as much as I used to. That used to be my home base where I'd spend a couple months a year. I had a visa and everything, but I've enjoyed Prague for 6 years, and then I just felt it was time to make some moves and get out of there. If I could do it again, I would spend that same time in Budapest. I love Budapest, and they have these thermal hot spring baths that just you feel like you're so rejuvenated when you pop in there for a few hours, and the people are interesting, complex. They're not the outwardly the most smiley or friendly people, but then once you make a connection, they're really genuine and authentic. And I don't know, I appreciated that vibe. So yeah, it's been Prague. I wish I spent more time in Budapest, but now I'm on my book tour, and I'm gonna head home to Seattle and recover for about a month after this.
Amazing. And then, going forward, now that you've got this place in Colombia, are you planning to spend like 6 months of the year there, 6 months in the US? Or what's that going to look like?
It's a good question. I wish, here's the thing, it's so beautiful. I got to send you guys pictures. It's so beautiful that it always fills itself with, I rent it out to single retired gringos. So it's 3 bedrooms. It has a jacuzzi and a steam room and like floor to ceiling windows, panoramic around all sides of the building. It's just absolutely beautiful. And you could have the kind of party in there that would destroy a lot of furniture. So I keep it off of Airbnb, and I try to just find chill single gringos that can afford it. Because for $2,000 a month, most people make about $400 or $500 a month total. And so, it's well out of the range of some of the locals, but it's a great match for somebody from Boston who's a retired dentist or something.
Okay, awesome. And so because you're renting that out, will you spend like less time in Colombia going forward?
Yeah, that's the dilemma. I got to find either kind of an overflow studio or something nearby that I can crash in when I'm in town. But we're in transition a little bit. So WSA is running itself. I'm pushing this book. I've got a few different things in the works, working on this podcast. I'm trying to branch into andysteves.com as a more general travel brand for custom travel, consulting, local tours, things like that. And so that's a lot of kind of computer time in front of me. So I just got to buckle down and take care of it, whether I'm here or somewhere else. I haven't thought that far ahead.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. And I love that you brought that up, because again, we're really big on like real life versus kind of like the social media life. Because I think that like I never want to be putting out something that's not true to what my life is actually like. And I think that people get this idea of what, laptop lifestyle or digital nomad life looks like. And I think that you just touched on kind of what the reality is. Like when you're creating a business and you're branching into new things, like you do spend a lot of time behind the computer, making sure that stuff can happen so you can do the things that you love, like the travel.
Yep, it's work. I'm not complaining, but it's work for sure.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. What does sort of your like day-to-day schedule look like?
I don't have one. Geez. Just let me run the last week past you. So last Sunday I was in Prague and had kind of a Sunday fun day with a bunch of friends saying goodbye because I had wrapped up all my Airbnb stuff. I was reconnecting with old friends and we had a great time from Sunday afternoon through Sunday night. Packed up my bags and had to be at the airport by 9 or 10 a.m. the next morning to catch a flight to Boston via Paris for my book talk at Harvard last week. Caught the first flight from Prague to Paris, no problem, but the Paris to Boston leg was canceled due to Air France strikes. It was a completely full plane, and I was one of the last to arrive. So I was at the very end of a long rescheduling line because the strike was going on indefinitely. I think it's still being influencing flights even 10 days later.
Oh my gosh.
So it became clear that I should hop on the phone, connected with Delta, was able to reroute from Amsterdam, but they only had one connecting flight by Air France the next morning. I was like, I'm not going to risk it. So hopped on Wi-Fi, requested my bag, and took an overnight bus trip to Amsterdam Schiphol Airport in time for my flight the next morning. Touchdown at 2 p.m. and I had my talk at 7 p.m. There in Boston that day. And now I've been traveling over to Colorado here in Fort Collins. Gonna speak at University of Wyoming today at noon, and then fly back to Seattle at 7 p.m. So that's just a few days.
Yeah. Nice leisurely pace.
And it just keeps going. But you know what? I love it, and it's a lot of fun. I've been able to see some family here in Fort Collins, and it's just been great reconnecting with everybody. So again, I can't complain. Sometimes I wish I had a routine, but then other times I feel like I'd get bored and get a little stir crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. When you started the podcast last year, what was kind of your inspiration and you know, what were you setting out to do with the podcast?
I spend so much time in my own head just walking down unfamiliar streets around the world, and I love listening to podcasts. I'm a big fan of Pod Save the World and Love It or Leave It. I listen to New York Times The Daily every morning along with NPR's Up First. So I love news podcasts, politics podcasts. Have you guys heard of My Favorite Murder?
I haven't listened to it, but we have a friend who really likes it and actually uses it. It's kind of weird, but it's like they fall asleep to like murder podcasts.
Yeah.
So that's like the one they like to fall asleep to.
I'm guilty too, but it's these two hilarious comedians, female comedians, and I get it because I have sisters and I have loved ones that are ladies, and walking down the street, you're always I get it. You can be nervous that somebody's always going to sneak up behind you and get you, and so I think that this show has has kind of connected with that and created this massive fan base of mostly ladies that love these stories because they can relate to just this weird juxtaposition of emotions, from laughing hilariously to hearing about terrifying stories. Anyways, My Favorite Murder is a great podcast, but I'm walking down these streets in Europe or around the world and just listening to these podcasts. I love it. And what I realize is that I have a ton of fascinating and interesting conversations with amazing locals from around the world, and including my guides in Europe. Why not just chat with them for 45 minutes and share their stories and give them some social media traffic and hopefully inspire others to pursue a more meaningful travel or more meaningful lifestyle. And I feel so fortunate to have the experiences that I've had, and I also fortunate that I'm passionate about sharing this, the value of meaningful travel, that it gives me the motivation and the drive to produce a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think we can definitely relate to that as well. You touched on something that I'd love to dig into around meaningful travel. And I think that something we've found after years of travel is that travel's become a lot more to us than just going to a place and seeing like the top 10 things to see there. And of course, don't get me wrong, like I love seeing that stuff, learning about the culture, the history, the food, that stuff is all important. But I feel like travel's given, us so much more in our lives, like so much more meaning, and helped us to connect to things that are really important to us. What's that sort of been like for you?
In pursuit of meaningful travel?
Yeah.
Yeah, for For me, it's really simple. The goal for me, I love anytime that I've had an unforgettable experience is because I've put myself out there to make connections with the people around me, the locals around me from completely different backgrounds. I just shared a beautiful meal with my local friend and guide David in Krakow. He and his new wife are like 8.5 months pregnant, and they insisted on having us over. We had baked trout, and we made pierogi together with banana and chocolate for dessert. And then we had I showed him I like to drink a hot whiskey or like a hot toddy kind of. I showed him how to make one of those, and it blew him away with his own ingredients. And, he's just such a good friend, and his wife is such a great lady. She's beautiful, and with this expectant baby, and they still invited us into their home and to share a meal. And I just thought that was really special. And the friendship created there is something I really value. So all of what I do is really to help facilitate other people make those connections themselves. And so I do talks about that. I share tips in my book. That's why I do the podcast, and we have the tours and blogs, just all pointing in that same direction.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I really love that. And of course, I think people should go check out your work and that sort of thing. But I'm curious if somebody's listening and maybe their travel style is more like in hostels. So you're meeting a lot of different people from different cultures, but not necessarily locals. What are some of your top tips for actually like meeting locals and connecting with those local people?
Yeah, that's a good question too. It is easy to stay in an international bubble as well, where you're stuck with just all the Aussies and Kiwis passing through. Because there's a lot of Aussies going around. Nothing against them, but they always have a man bun and are playing the guitar in the corner. And
a singlet.
Yeah, exactly.
You can pick them out a mile away.
Yeah, they're all very nice and warm people though. So, one thing that I'd always suggest, no matter what your travel style is to pay attention to the things that you enjoy, whether it's your hobbies or your interests, whether you're into music festivals or sports events or half marathons or chess or yoga or ventriloquism, whatever it is that you're into. Google the heck out of what's going on in Europe related to your interest, and then you can use those kind of events and dates as a way as checkpoints throughout your trip to make sure you drop into this city at this time, because that's when you're going to find yourself in a crowd of people who've done the exact same thing, who put in the effort to pursue something that they're interested in, and immediately you have something in common and you can build a friendship from there. I found that to be the best way to meet locals wherever I am.
Yeah, definitely. And what do you do if there's kind of like a language barrier?
Google Translate is great.
Yeah.
And it's something that, let's see, you can type out, you can show in big letters for somebody who might be elderly, who can't see well. You can speak into it and it translates visually. You can hold it over a menu and it translates visually onto your phone screen. It replaces the letters, which is crazy technology. But that's been a huge help. It's really changed any sort of language barriers I find. Yeah, so that would be my key suggestion.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Google Translate was got us through Japan and Korea, I think. I mean, Japanese and Korean people are so kind, especially Japanese people. We had people go out of their way immensely to help us out when we were lost or confused. But yeah, in the grocery store when it's I don't know what this thing is, Google Translate saved the day every time.
Yeah. One time I was in a grocery store in Budapest, and I was going down the cheese aisle, and I thought sear meant smoked, but it actually means cheese. So I was looking for cheese that wasn't smoked, but I kept seeing sear on all these different packages. I'm like, how do they not have any non-smoked cheese in this place?
I just love it.
Because they just had cheese upon cheese upon cheese. But I found out after the fact, thanks to Google, that sear it means cheese. And so it's like, why does all this cheese say cheese on it? But I thought it meant smoked cheese.
You're like this crazy tourist who's just walking up and down the cheese aisle, and you're like, where's the cheese? Where's the normal cheese?
Where's the cheese?
I love that. That's amazing. And so you've touched on this a little bit as we've been talking, but it's one of the things that people ask us the most, and one of the things that's been a little bit more challenging for us just as we've lived kind of all over the world. But how do you kind of keep a sense of community or make sure that you're kind of connected to community?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess there's sacrifices that you make in any sort of lifestyle that you choose. Having a actual legit community is one of those sacrifices, I think. You can keep in touch with your friends and loved ones via FaceTime and Snapchat and Instagram and all that. But yeah, I'm on the road, and all of the people that I've been hanging out with for the last 3 days aren't going to be here where I'm going tonight. So that's just one of those things you got to kind of live with, I guess.
Yeah, that's sort of what we found as well. And I think there's pros and cons to it. Like, you meet so many incredible people when you're traveling. And I think that you can kind of build sort of an online community, which is really amazing. But yeah, we were talking about the other day how we haven't had like a group of friends in one place for probably like 4 years now.
That's the thing. When you stay somewhere, then you can definitely develop a community. But I've just been too much of a tumbleweed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, amazing. So if people want to check out WSA, your book, the podcast, where can they go to find all of that stuff?
Sure. Just Google Andy Steves and you can find just about everything. But andysteves.com. You can check me out on Instagram. I'm still, learning the Instagram game, Andy Steves Travel. My book is called Andy Steves Europe, City Hopping on a Budget. And my tour company is WSA Europe. So, yeah, check those out and holler if you have any questions or want to learn more.
Yeah, amazing. And we'll definitely put all the links for that stuff in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time today, Andy. It's been awesome talking with you.
Yeah, thanks
so much for having me, guys. It's been great to connect. Amanda and Ryan, give me a call any day, and I'd love to follow up with you and hear how you guys are going too. I should have you on my podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at World Wanderers1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.